It started on a freezing November night. Floodlights burned across the endless concrete walls of Blackridge Federal Mega Prison, a massive high-security complex built far outside the city limits. The prison was designed to hold over 6,000 inmates, some of the most dangerous criminals in the country: serial offenders, organized crime bosses, contract killers, and prisoners serving life sentences without parole. Blackridge wasn't just a prison, it was a fortress. Inside, every corridor was monitored by cameras. Steel doors sealed entire wings with the push of a button. Guards patrolled 24 hours a day. For the public, it was proof that the justice system had control over the worst criminals society had produced. But on that night, something inside the fortress had gone very, very wrong. At 2:14 a.m., an alarm echoed through Block D, the section reserved for high-risk inmates. Guards rushed down the concrete hallway, their boots slamming against the floor as emergency lights flickered red. One of the inmates had been found unconscious in his cell. The prisoner was Marcus Vale. Vale wasn't just another inmate. He was serving multiple life sentences for his role in a violent criminal network that had operated across 3 countries. Prosecutors had described him as highly intelligent, manipulative, and extremely dangerous. That was why he had been placed in isolation. When the guards forced open his cell door, they froze. Marcus Vale wasn't unconscious, he was dead. And something about the scene immediately felt wrong. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken furniture, no visible injuries. Vale lay on the concrete floor beside his bunk, his eyes open, staring toward the ceiling. Within minutes, the prison went into lockdown. Every inmate was ordered back to their cells. Armed response teams sealed the entire wing while prison officials contacted federal investigators. By sunrise, the news had already reached the outside world. A high-risk inmate had died inside one of the most secure prisons in the country. But as investigators soon discovered, Marcus Vale's death was only the beginning. Leading the investigation was Special Agent Daniel Reyes, a veteran federal investigator known for handling complex prison cases. Reyes arrived at Blackridge just after dawn. As he stepped through the enormous security gates, the scale of the prison was overwhelming. Towering fences lined with razor wire stretched across the landscape. Guard towers stood like silent sentinels above the walls. But Reyes wasn't interested in the architecture. He wanted to know how a man locked inside one of the most secure facilities in the country had died without anyone noticing. Inside Block D, the atmosphere felt tense. Prison guards avoided eye contact. Some looked exhausted, others looked nervous. Warden Laura Whitaker met Reyes at the entrance to the isolation wing. "We reviewed the security footage," she said quietly. "No one entered Vale's cell." Reyes frowned. "That's impossible." Whitaker nodded grimly. "That's what we thought too." Inside the cell, forensic teams had already begun their work. Vale's body had been moved onto a stretcher, but the room remained exactly as it had been found. The bed was untouched, the sink was dry. Nothing appeared out of place. Reyes crouched beside the spot where the inmate had been discovered. "What about the guards?" he asked. "They checked the wing every 30 minutes, Whitaker said. "According to the logs, Vale was alive during the last round." Reyes stood slowly. That meant Vale had died sometime within a 30-minute window. Inside a locked cell, under constant surveillance. It didn't make sense. Then one of the forensic analysts spoke. "Agent Reyes, you might want to see this." The analyst pointed toward the wall behind the bunk. At first, Reyes didn't notice anything unusual. But when the investigator shined a light across the surface, a faint marking appeared, scratched into the concrete. It was a message, 3 words carved carefully into the wall. "They're watching us." Reyes felt a chill run down his spine. "Who wrote it?" he asked. The analyst shook his head. "We don't know. But this wasn't here during the last inspection." The room fell silent. If Vale hadn't written the message, then someone else had been inside the cell. But according to the security system, that was impossible. As the investigation continued, Reyes began reviewing hours of surveillance footage from Block D. Every hallway, every cell door, every guard patrol. Nothing looked unusual. But then something strange appeared. At 1:57 a.m., 17 minutes before Vale was discovered, the camera outside his cell flickered. Just for a moment. A brief distortion. A flash of static. Then the image returned. Reyes leaned closer to the screen. "Play that again." The technician rewound the footage. Static, flash, normal video. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but during those 2 seconds, the camera showed nothing. No hallway, no cell door, just empty interference. Reyes slowly leaned back in his chair. Inside one of the most advanced prison surveillance systems in the country, a camera had mysteriously gone blind for exactly 2 seconds. And during that exact moment, Marcus Vail had died. But the deeper investigators looked, the more disturbing the case became. Because later that afternoon, while searching Vail's prison records, Reyes discovered something that made the situation far more dangerous. Marcus Vail hadn't been the only inmate inside Blackridge who had recently written the same message. 2 other high-risk prisoners had carved the exact same words into their cell walls. "They're watching us," and both of those inmates had requested emergency psychological evaluations just days before Vail died. But when investigators finally opened the sealed report from the prison psychologist, what they found inside would change the entire investigation. By the time Special Agent Daniel Reyes opened the sealed psychological report, the entire atmosphere inside Blackridge Federal Mega Prison had shifted. What had started as a suspicious inmate death was now something much bigger. The report had been written by the prison's chief psychologist, Dr. Evelyn Carter, a specialist who had worked inside high-security prison systems for more than 15 years. According to her notes, 3 different inmates from Block D had reported the same disturbing experience. Marcus Vail, Anthony Riker, and Tomasz Kowalczyk. None of the men knew each other. They were housed in separate isolation units. Their crimes were unrelated. Their backgrounds were completely different. Yet all 3 had reported the exact same fear. They believed someone inside the prison was secretly observing them. Not through normal surveillance, but through something else. Dr. Carter had initially assumed the claims were symptoms of paranoia, something common among inmates in prolonged isolation. But the more she interviewed them, the less certain she became. Because the 3 men described the same pattern. Every night, sometime between 1:30 and 2 o'clock a.m., the prison corridor lights would dim slightly. The cameras outside their cells would flicker, and then they would hear footsteps, slow footsteps, not like a normal guard patrol. These footsteps stopped outside their cell doors, but when they looked through the narrow observation slit, no one was there. At first, the men assumed it was psychological stress. Until something else began happening. Small items inside their cells would move. A book left on the bunk would be on the floor the next morning. A metal cup would appear in a different position. Tiny details that suggested someone had been inside their locked cells. Without opening the doors, when Dr. Carter wrote the report, she recommended a full inspection of the surveillance system and cell locking mechanisms. But the request had never been approved. The report had been quietly filed away. Now Marcus Vail was dead. Agent Reyes placed the document on the table and looked across the office at Warden Laura Whitaker. "You never saw this report?" he asked. Whitaker shook her head slowly. "No. If I had, I would have authorized the inspection immediately." Reyes studied her expression carefully. She looked genuinely disturbed, but something still didn't sit right with him. 3 high-risk inmates had reported the same thing. And one of them had ended up dead. "This isn't paranoia," Reyes said quietly. "Something is happening in this prison." Later that evening, Reyes requested a full technical audit of the surveillance network. Blackridge's security system was one of the most advanced ever installed in a correctional facility. Over 2,000 cameras monitored every corridor, staircase, and security checkpoint. The system was supposed to be impossible to bypass. But when the technical team reviewed the footage from the past month, they found something disturbing. The same camera glitch that occurred outside Marcus Vail's cell had happened multiple times before. Always between 1:50 and 2 o'clock a.m., always lasting less than 3 seconds. And always in the same section of Block D. Reyes stared at the timeline of incidents displayed on the monitor. Whoever was behind this knew exactly how the surveillance system worked. But the deeper the team searched, the stranger things became. Because every time the glitch appeared, one additional detail showed up in the footage. A shadow. At first, the analysts thought it was a trick of the lighting, but after enhancing the images, the shape became clearer. During the moment of interference, a figure briefly appeared in the corridor outside the cells, tall, broad-shouldered, standing perfectly still. Then the static would clear, and the hallway would be empty again. Reyes rubbed his temples. "Can you enhance the face?" he asked. The technician zoomed in, but the figure's features remained hidden in the distortion. Whoever it was had positioned themselves perfectly within the camera's blind spot. That meant one thing: this wasn't random. Someone inside Blackridge knew exactly how to move through the prison without being seen. The following morning, Reyes ordered interviews with every guard assigned to Block D during the night shifts. Most of them denied noticing anything unusual, until one officer hesitated. His name was Officer Grant Sullivan, a 6-year veteran of the prison staff. He sat stiffly in the interrogation room, his hands folded tightly. "Officer Sullivan," Reyes said calmly, "have you ever noticed anything unusual during your patrols?" Sullivan looked down at the table. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he spoke quietly. "There are areas in the prison the cameras don't cover." Reyes leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Sullivan glanced toward the door before lowering his voice. "When the prison was built 20 years ago, the original design included maintenance corridors behind some of the cell blocks. They were meant for electrical repairs and plumbing access. Are they still used?" Reyes asked. "Not officially," Sullivan said. "Most of them were sealed years ago." "Most," Sullivan hesitated again. "That's what we were told." Reyes felt a surge of tension. "Show me." An hour later, Sullivan led Reyes and two security officers into the lower levels beneath Block D. The air smelled damp and stale. Dust coated the concrete floor. Old pipes ran along the ceiling. Finally, Sullivan stopped in front of a rusted metal door hidden behind a stack of maintenance crates. "This wasn't here during my first year," he said. Reyes stepped closer. The lock had been recently replaced. Someone had been using the door. He nodded to the officer beside him. "Open it." The bolt snapped loose with a loud metallic crack. The door creaked open slowly. Beyond it stretched a narrow corridor running parallel to the prison cells above. Electrical wiring lined the walls. Ventilation ducts hummed overhead, and along one side of the corridor were small metal panels spaced every few feet. Reyes walked toward the first panel and pulled it open. Inside was a narrow observation slit. It looked directly into one of the isolation cells above. His stomach tightened. This hidden corridor allowed someone to watch inmates without ever appearing on the prison cameras. Slowly, Reyes moved to the next panel. Then the next, each one opened into another cell. Then he reached the final panel. When he pulled it open, his blood ran cold, because inside Marcus Vale's cell wall, the concrete had been carefully cut away, creating a hidden opening large enough for someone to reach through. Someone had been entering the cell from inside the wall, without ever unlocking the door. But the most disturbing discovery was still waiting. Because when the forensic team searched deeper into the hidden corridor, they found a small surveillance station, 3 monitors, a chair, and a notebook filled with handwritten observations about specific inmates. Marcus Vale's name was listed at the top of the page, but beneath it were 2 other names: Anthony Riker, Tomasz Kowalczyk, the same inmates who had carved the message into their walls. "They're watching us." Reyes stared at the notebook, his mind racing. Whoever had built this hidden surveillance system had been studying these prisoners for weeks, maybe months, but just as the team began photographing the evidence, a loud alarm suddenly erupted through the prison. Red lights flashed across the hallway. Reyes turned toward Sullivan. "What's happening?" The officer's face turned pale. "That alarm only triggers for one thing." "What?" Sullivan swallowed hard. "It means an inmate from isolation is missing." And when Reyes rushed back to Block D, he discovered something that made the situation far worse. Anthony Riker's cell door was still locked, but Riker himself had vanished. The alarm sirens echoed through Blackridge Federal Mega Prison as armed response teams flooded Block D. Special Agent Daniel Reyes pushed past the guards gathering outside Cell 27, the isolation unit assigned to Anthony Riker. The heavy steel door was still sealed shut. The electronic lock indicator glowed green, which meant the system believed the door had never been opened. Yet when the guards forced it open, the cell was empty. Anthony Riker had disappeared, inside a maximum security prison designed to prevent exactly that. Reyes stepped slowly into the room. Nothing looked disturbed. But then Reyes noticed something near the base of the wall behind the bed, a faint line, barely visible. He knelt down and ran his hand across the concrete. The surface shifted, just like the opening they had discovered earlier inside Marcus Vale's cell. Reyes turned toward the guards, moved the bed. The heavy metal frame screeched against the floor as the officers dragged it aside. Beneath it, the hidden seam in the wall became clearer. Someone had built another access point, Ray's pried the panel open. Behind it was the same narrow maintenance corridor they had discovered earlier. The same hidden passage that allowed someone to enter the cells without unlocking the doors. Only this time, the corridor showed fresh footprints in the dust. Someone had used it very recently. Ray's felt the investigation shifting in his mind. Marcus Vale had died inside his locked cell. Anthony Riker had vanished from his. And both cells connected to the same hidden corridor system. But the real question was why. Ray's grabbed the radio clipped to his vest, locked down the entire prison. No one leaves this facility. Within minutes, Blackridge went into full emergency containment. Every gate was sealed. Every guard post was doubled. Helicopters circled above the prison walls as investigators searched every building, corridor, and maintenance tunnel. But the longer the search continued, the stranger things became. Because Anthony Riker hadn't escaped the prison. Instead, he was found 3 hours later in the exact place investigators least expected. Inside the hidden surveillance room beneath Block D, Officer Grant Sullivan was the one who discovered him. When the team forced open the door to the underground observation station, Riker was sitting calmly in the chair facing the monitors. As if he had been waiting for them, his prison uniform was covered in dust from the tunnels, but otherwise he looked unharmed. Agent Reyes stepped into the room carefully. "How did you get down here?" he asked. Riker looked up slowly. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he smiled faintly. "I followed him." Reyes exchanged a glance with the officers behind him. "Followed who?" "The man in the corridor," Riker said quietly. Reyes felt the tension return. "What man?" Riker leaned back in the chair and gestured toward the monitors. "The one who's been watching us." The room fell silent. Reyes stepped closer. "You're saying someone else was down here?" Riker nodded. "He came into my cell through the wall last night." "Did he say anything?" "No." "Did you see his face?" Riker's smile faded. "No." Reyes stared at him. "Then how did you follow him?" Riker's voice dropped to a whisper. "He wanted me to." That answer sent a ripple of unease through the investigators. Reyes turned to Officer Sullivan. "Search every corridor connected to this room." But the search turned up nothing. No additional footprints. No signs of another person. Whoever had been inside the tunnels had vanished, just like Anthony Riker had earlier. The next morning, Reyes and the forensic team examined the notebook discovered in the hidden surveillance station. Page after page contained observations about inmates housed in Block D sleep patterns, behavior changes, emotional responses to isolation. But one section of the notebook stood out. At the top of the page was a title, Long-Term Containment Study. Below it were the names of several high-risk inmates. Marcus Vale, Anthony Riker, Tomasz Kowalczyk. Next to each name were handwritten notes describing how the prisoners reacted to extreme psychological pressure, extended isolation, sleep disruption, environmental stress. The conclusion written at the bottom of the page was chilling. Subject responses indicate long-term inmates develop heightened paranoia and psychological instability under controlled observation conditions. Reyes looked up from the notebook slowly. This wasn't just surveillance. Someone had been conducting an experiment, using the most dangerous inmates inside the prison as test subjects. But one question remained. Who had built the hidden corridor system? Who had created the secret observation room? And who had been entering the cells at night? The answer finally came 2 days later. During a review of old architectural records, investigators uncovered something buried in the prison's construction history. Blackridge Federal Mega Prison had originally been built with assistance from a private security consulting company, a firm that specialized in designing containment systems for high-risk prisoners. One of the company's lead consultants had remained involved with the prison for years after construction, conducting research on prison management strategies. His name was Dr. Harold Mercer, a former behavioral scientist. When investigators searched Mercer's records, they discovered something disturbing. Mercer had been granted restricted access to Blackridge on multiple occasions over the past year. Officially, he had been studying how prisons manage long-term inmates. But the hidden corridors, the observation station, and the psychological notes in the notebook suggested something very different. Mercer hadn't just been studying the prisoners. He had been studying how far their minds could be pushed. When authorities finally located Mercer 3 weeks later, he denied everything. He claimed he had never built the tunnels, never entered the prison at night, never run any experiment. But the evidence inside Blackridge told another story. The hidden surveillance room was dismantled. The corridor system was sealed permanently. And Anthony Riker was transferred to another facility. But the final twist in the case came months later, because when prison officials conducted a final inspection of Block D, they discovered something no one had noticed before. Inside Tomasz Kowalczyk's cell, the third inmate from the notebook, investigators found a new message carved into the concrete wall. 3 words, the same words Marcus Vale had written before he died. They're still watching, and the security footage from that night showed something chilling. At exactly 1:57 a.m., the camera outside Kowalczyk's cell flickered. Just for a moment, then returned to normal, with no one in the hallway. If you think this case was disturbing, the next one might make you question what really happens inside the world's most secure prisons. So make sure you subscribe, because some stories don't end when the investigation is over.